we're gonna do a hard migration over to Beanstalk University. And Maud, do you want to just kind of kick it off and run for the next 20 minutes and maybe longer Publius last time?
Let's do it. Hi, Publius.
How are we doing, sir?
Doing all right. Ready for some questions?
Always, always.
Right. Let's start with some of what has been discussed in the economics channel over the past week. So this is a new iteration of permanent deposits, and the idea now is timed deposits. With the thinking being, what if we have something I guess similar to what a convex and curve does, where you can deposit into the silo for like 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever the time period is. And depending on the length of that period, you get, let's say, more seeds than other. How would you compare that to the stock system? Do you first of all see them complementary or completely different? And if they're different, then how different are they? And if they can work together, how can they do that?
Well, this is a great question, and I think the permanent deposits idea keeps coming back because there's nothing wrong with protocols built on top of Beanstalk locking deposits for a period of time, and therefore implicitly the assets are locked. But the question that keeps being asked is instead one of whether at the protocol level Beanstalk should support locked deposits. And if it supports locked deposits, then it needs to pay for the locked deposits or incentivize the locking of the deposits for some reason. And if we think about what the goal of Beanstalk is with the silo, it's to minimize the two things. One, inorganic demand when the price is too high, and two, the amount of run on the bank or the excess supply when the price is below $1. And on the one hand, locking the deposits certainly helps with the latter in the sense that there's a fixed supply schedule, so you don't know you know exactly when it's going to come due, and therefore there's a limit to the amount of supply that can be sold at any given time. But on the other hand, and this is a big thing, on the other hand, that locked supply sort of functions as an overhang over the system, right? Where if you think about the function of withdrawals, one of the big problems with the withdrawal freeze is that now you have like this period of time, 4 or 5 hours, where there's known sell pressure that's coming, but it's coming in a period of time. And therefore, in the intermediate period, it's unclear what the efficient buyer should do. Should they wait until these withdrawals withdraw and sell? Should they buy now and sell now? What should they do? And the overhang, the fact that the market sees that there's this sell pressure that's coming, or expected sell pressure, highly likely sell pressure that's coming, that ultimately creates an inefficiency in the market. And so if we go back to what Beanstalk wants the most efficient market possible. So even though we may think it may be intuitive that locking assets is better for stability, in reality, it's more likely to exacerbate downside volatility when it happens, because it's going to make it more prime for things to unlock at certain times and release. And again, we go back to how we started. There's nothing wrong with protocols on top of Beanstalk locking things for a period of time or having liquidation prices and things like that. That's highly likely. But the concept is, from a Beanstalk native perspective, the goal is to keep the protocol as simple as humanly possible, such that the value of the credit of the protocol and the value of the beans is truly endogenous. And you really only get that if you have the simplest possible core mechanism. So the more, I wouldn't even call this like a bell and whistle, like the improvement to the soil market so that its pods are more distributed. That actually is an improvement to the protocol. This, I would say, is more of a misguided. It misses the point of the system, which is to be as low friction as possible. And there's no reason for the protocol to pay for this friction. One thing that I mean, if it were up to us, we'd get rid of the withdrawal freeze altogether. It's not really realistic to do that from an implementation perspective at the moment. It's more realistic to remove it down to 1 season. So, but the point is, the overhang is economically inefficient, and we wouldn't really be in favor of the introduction of any future overhangs in any capacity.
Thank you for the detailed answer. I had a few follow-up questions, but I think you covered them all. Anyone in the audience as well, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the town hall chat. Otherwise, we'll continue the discussion there. Austin follows up Publius and asks, why is the withdrawal timer the same as the flood timer?
So that's a great question. The original concept is that if you know that there is a flood coming, what that basically means, let's say that there's a downpour, or previously it was raining. So there's a downpour and there's a flood coming. The concept is, if you're going to buy beans above peg, because it's downpouring, if you're going to buy beans above peg, you're paying a premium for the beans. And the only reason really to pay a premium for the beans, other than there's some external arbitrage that Beanstalk doesn't care about, from Beanstalk's perspective, the only reason to buy beans above peg is to participate in the bean seigniorage, the yield that's coming between now and the flood. After the flood, who knows what the yield is? So the reason, the inorganic demand would be from buying above peg, paying a premium, depositing, and then collecting seigniorage. And the thing is, if the withdrawal freeze is less than the seasons before a flood, then you can still buy, pay a premium, deposit, collect some seigniorage, withdraw, unlock after the freeze, sell your beans at the same premium, and therefore you collected the seigniorage but didn't collect a loss on the change in the bean price. And so the whole concept is, what Beanstalk does by rule is it makes it such that the only reason an efficient buyer would be buying beans above peg if it's raining is because they want to hold beans for a longer period of time. And so you can't always eliminate inorganic demand from the market. Like, there's people that may still do it, but if they do it, they're going to lose a lot of money. And that's what happened during the September pump and dump. Was there were a lot of participants that bought and deposited, and then either withdrew immediately or withdrew after the season of plenty, but in both cases didn't earn enough seigniorage to cover the change in the price of the beans.
Thank you for that answer. I guess a bit of new terminology has been used in here. Might get some time for people to get used to. But as JWW wrote in the chat, flood is the season of plenty, or what used to be the season of plenty. I guess it still is the season of plenty until the BFP passes. Okay, continuing the discussion about the silo, Publius, I was thinking, what are your thoughts about removing beans completely from the silo? So only liquidity pools are to be whitelisted into the silo, and the thinking is the following: for you to enter the silo, you have to be in an LP pair, and then let's say the price of bean is below 1, people are converting. This is when you're allowed to convert into beans. But then when the price of beans go above 1, the protocol automatically converts anything that's beans into LP again. So ideally speaking, you'd only want to have LP pairs in the silo and not beans. What do you think about that?
So you're saying sort of like a forced maximum, like the system stays at the maximum LP.
Yes.
So there's a couple things. One, we in general have always felt that you want to avoid the protocol making any decisions at the economics, at the market level, or doing any open market operations. Obviously, the flood is the one exception, but as we were just talking about to answer Austin's question, the flood only happens in certain situations, and the economics that are created by the flood are, such that it creates a behavior where the efficient thing to do is not participate, if that makes sense. So the goal with Convert is to effectively facilitate efficient price discovery of beans. And if one of the things that was very evident in the early days when there wasn't Convert, so I guess before December, was that when the price was too high, the people that were holding deposited beans they were getting more deposited beans and wanted to sell their exposure to deposited beans, but couldn't. And it's very natural to then say, well, why not just do it automatically at the protocol level? Well, the reality is that if you do that, you lose the price discovery. So if somebody knows that they can always buy beans at $1 because there's going to be this infinite convert of deposited beans at exactly $1, that basically caps the risk in a lot of different capacities of how you're measuring risk of the bean price jumping too high. So if we think about efficient price discovery for the bean price on both the upside and the downside, having this artificial price cap for a significant amount of supply that can be very easily projected out, like, oh, there's 60 million beans that are just waiting to be converted at exactly $1. Therefore, the price can't go above $1. That makes it really easy to short beans, as an example. So you can't have at the protocol level, if you want efficient price discovery from the market, you can't have Beanstalk doing this type of behavior. Now, separately, it may be desirable for certain individual farmers to say at exactly $1, I want to convert back to LP. That's fine, but that's something that should happen on top of Beanstalk, again, as like a protocol that makes using Beanstalk easier or interfacing with it easier and simpler or more autonomous for the farmer, but not at the Beanstalk protocol level. Beanstalk as a protocol doesn't want to dictate what the price of a bean should be in any capacity, including that the price is too high, and saying it should be lower, and the protocol is going to just immediately return the price to $1. It really only does that during a flood, and the case for that is, I think, I already laid out.
That's a pretty good answer. I guess having beans in circulation comes into the equation, so you can't like know exactly what's going to happen, given that there might be beans that are outside of the silo. But I agree with you that knowing what's inside the silo already gives you an idea or an understanding. As you said, if there's like 30 million beans deposited, then you know that there is this much that's there, and that is a valid point. Okay, I wanted to move a bit to governance. I'm following up to the latest the BeanPod episode with John Woo, where they discussed zero knowledge proofs, and part of it they discussed how ZK proofs could be used in governance for voting, basically. And the idea is for it to have what in the normal world we call a secret ballot, where you vote but no one knows who voted what or what the vote is. And what we have today with governance is that everyone can know what people have voted, and things like that might intimidate people to vote in a certain way or not vote at all. And then lastly, which was something that we've experienced, is that you can see what the vote is and then decide to try to sway the vote in the last hour. What do you think about ZK voting, I guess, or governance through ZK proofs? And do you think this is something that Beanstalk might want to implement in the future?
Well, I think the question that you're asking is a very philosophical one about whether more information is always better to create a more efficient market. And that applies not just to governance, but it also applies to price discovery for Beanstalk and Beanstalk-related assets. So, frankly, and a great example of that would be, let's say you're taking out a derivative on top of beans. You've got some price that your CDP is going to get margined at, right? Should that price be, which currently, if we looked at if you look at kind of what's been happening over the past month or two on chain, a lot of those CDPs, the bigger CDPs, have been getting hunted because the price at which they're going to get margined is very clear. So on the one hand, you could make the argument that it's a very efficient market to have all of those prices be totally transparent and everyone know what the margin price is for every position in the market, for example. But on the other hand, maybe it's actually a more efficient market if nobody knows anyone's margin price and people are actually just taking directional bets. Now, I think there's probably a good argument in both directions. Just kind of thinking out loud, the role of arbitrageurs that are taking advantage of some of these. I don't know if you'd even call them arbitrageurs. I guess whether you'd call them arbitrageurs is really that might be like a de facto answer. If you consider them arbitrageurs, then they're making it a more efficient market. If they're not doing arbitrage, then it's not really helping the efficiency of the market. They're just making money. So I don't. It's particularly hard to know, particularly given such a speculative space that we're in right now, where there's so little real economic activity. So to some extent, like the demand for a lot of these assets, even Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Beans for the time being, until there's real economic activity, is largely derived from speculation. And therefore, knowing at what prices people are speculating at, that's probably helpful towards minimizing the market just getting totally out of whack and crazily speculative. Like, it's helpful to have that knowledge be transparent. But at the same time, I don't think it's reasonable to expect, if zero knowledge proofs are available, that market participants won't elect to use them, right? Like, it's if you're trading and you're taking out a CDP, or you're using a CDP to take out some sort of debt position, you're gonna want to use the zero knowledge technology. It's very clearly beneficial to the user. So it seems like we're going in that direction anyways, economically. And then to answer your point more directly, Mon, about governance, I think that voting, in a democracy, it's very clear that who votes on what, being anonymous at the ballot is helpful. But when we have elected officials, we don't really like there to be anonymous voting in Congress, for example. So there isn't a one size fits all answer to this, and perhaps it is that wallets voting individually on things are anonymous, but if there's a delegation, as of now, Beanstalk doesn't have any delegation of stock for voting, but if that were to exist in the future, not to say that it should, but if it were, perhaps anyone that has delegated stock, if you've delegated to someone, you get to know what they voted for, something like that. So what's an appropriate amount of information to disclose from an implementation perspective for various things is sort of up in the air, but we would tend to assume that the market is going to drive things towards a zero knowledge environment sooner rather than later, assuming the tech exists.
So it's a balance between privacy and accountability when it's governance-wise. Austin asks, and this is a thought experiment, I guess, that you've brought up earlier in an earlier class, and that is, what happens when Beanstalk grows and, let's say, becomes the dominant currency, and it outgrows Ethereum, where we're right now in a time where Ethereum derives its value from Beans. How do you think that this can be? And then you'll have this reflexive, scenario that can happen when if that happens, let's say. So Austin asks, how can this be mitigated? I know that you said that you were thinking about this. I don't know if you continue thinking about it, or if you even have an answer to that. But here's the question.
So I hate to play coy, but I think I've got a decent answer, but I'm not ready to talk about it yet because it could be really stupid. So, maybe next week, but probably not next week either. But we're working on it.
That's fine. I can maybe continue the question or the thought experiment a bit, and it's okay if the answer continues later. Do you think when that happens for Bean to outgrow, let's say, the host that it's in, is that possible with Beanstalk only being on Ethereum, or will it, by default, Beans and Beanstalk will have to be, cross-chain or used elsewhere for it to actually outgrow Ethereum itself? Can the host outgrow the environment that it's in, or only once it's actually in multiple places? And it's okay if the answer is also for later.
I think this question is it, when you try to think about and really get to the bottom of what like Bitcoin maxis say about Ethereum, it's that the main reason for using Bitcoin or holding Bitcoin is purely its endogenous utility as money. And Ethereum, the thesis behind building Ethereum was that it's going to be the same thing, but allow for computation to happen on top of it. And because you have computation on top of it, the value of Ethereum is inherently exogenous, right? So people aren't holding Ethereum because it's money, even though at this point in time, people very well may. But I'm just saying what the criticism is. People are holding it because of the expectation of future use of compute power. And then you can get into, well, what's the compute power worth? That's a separate question. Now, at the end of the day, there's a good argument to be made that Beanstalk at scale is an exogenous source of demand for Ethereum, because Ethereum is going to be in the silo to a large extent in a Bean ETH LP token or in stock ETH LP tokens or who knows what else, because Ethereum is the most decentralized asset on the Ethereum network, or Ether, I should say, is the most decentralized asset on the Ethereum network, and is very attractive to trade against, save for its volatility. Now, to talk about just mitigating that risk at a surface level, you can have other assets other than Ethereum trading against Beans, right? USDC and the like. But at the end of the day, the whole network, the whole security of the network is secured by Ethereum. And so you can't really have that much exogenous value existing on the Ethereum network if it's all secured by the market cap of Ethereum. And market cap isn't the best metric, but the point is there's a limit to the amount of value that can exist on Ethereum exogenous to Ethereum. And that's really a catch-22 that creates a problem if the value proposition of Ethereum is, well, there's going to be exogenous demand for Ethereum to use it, but if Beanstalk is the main use case and its limitation is that there's not enough exogenous value on Ethereum, you can see how this becomes a problem for Ethereum. So frankly, not sure that the answer here is what people may think, but I think it's more likely that Beanstalk just needs to continue on the path of establishing endogenous value of its own. So as cool as all of the other stuff, like what Mr. Manifold is talking about with Root and what could exist on top of Root and on top of Beanstalk in various capacities, as cool as that is, it's very important that Beanstalk establish itself as an issuer of money with endogenous value. And the strength of its credit history is really the core to that. And so to get to answer your question, Mohit, about, well, what does the future of Beanstalk look like and how is this risk mitigated? Frankly, it's hard to imagine the risk being mitigated by moving to other chains that are either less decentralized or may have higher market caps, but other security risks. And then there's obviously cross-chain issues. And what does all of that look like? I mean, I think at a high level, it's more likely that at some point Beanstalk becomes like a network of its own with its own validator set. Now, that may be very distant in the future, and that may be history may prove that to be a wrong take. But when we analyze from a macro perspective the situation at large, I think there is an Ethereum native solution, which, again, just at the risk of sounding like a total buffoon, not quite ready to disclose it yet, but think that there is a way to grow very healthily on Ethereum for a significant period of time. But when we talk about, and I mean, excuse me, the other issue is if your network security is coming from the demand for some protocol, a la what we saw with Luna, right? When you have a decrease in demand for Beans in this case, if the security of the Ethereum network is dependent on there being demand for ETH from Beanstalk, that can cause there to be danger to Ethereum. And again, we go back to, well, the demand for ETH is coming from exogenous value. Maybe there's still enough demand and it's decentralized enough such that there's no takeover of the Ethereum network. but maybe not. It depends at what scale this is and how large Beanstalk is a part of the ecosystem. The same exact problem applies if Beanstalk has its own validator set. Now, like, what is the value that validators are earning for continuing to validate through a down period? Maybe, some iteration of the stock system can be used on that front. Haven't given this too much thought, frankly, because I think it's very far down the line and a great problem to have if we ever get there. But just thinking out loud a little bit.
Do you think having something like that, which sounds a bit like a stable Bitcoin, let's say, given that it will have its own validators, can that be kind of like having fees then, or having some sort of like a negative interest rate, if you want to call it, where those validators are being paid for that service? Or is it exactly the same? And that's how I see it. It is just another, seigniorage, but people are getting paid for it because, those who are maintaining PEG in the silo are, doing that validation or that utility in itself.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest iteration is probably that the silo becomes the staking, deposited assets become the staked assets to some extent. And therefore not much changes from an economics perspective. But to be honest, really haven't thought through this one particularly. So take all of this with a grain of salt.
That's fair. I think, we'll probably have a lot to think about before we come to that. But interesting questions nevertheless. Sync asks, and we're back to ZK proofs. Do you think this can be something that be used for the pod marketplace, for example? I guess this question can be applied to the whole of Beanstalk, and we're not talking about governance now. And you've alluded to you believing that this is anyways where, the whole, economy or the blockchain in general is going towards. So users of Beanstalk will, have privacy through ZK rollups. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think over time, it's hard to know at the pace that everything will develop at, but hard to imagine that won't be the case at some point.
All right. We're already 8 minutes on the hour, and I think we're at the end of the questions. So unless we have any other questions, we can conclude class. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Publius, always, and see you next class next week.
Thanks, guys. Take care.